This pint of world-class beer cost me 25,000 Czech koruna. I'm just kidding. It was 50 koruna, about $2.20. It's perfect. The foam is thick, the glass is heavy, and the pub around me is quiet, full of people just talking after a day's work. It feels solid, real. Last month I was drinking a San Miguel on a beach in the Philippines. It cost about the same. The price was identical, but the world outside that bar was not. The beer was cold, sure, but the air was so thick with humidity you could swim in it. The bar was on the sand, which sounds like a dream until you realize sand gets into absolutely everything, and the power flickers every time the wind blows too hard. One of these places offered me a first-world retirement on a Midwestern budget. The other offered a constant battle against chaos, a daily fight just to get the simple things to work. And if you're thinking about retiring abroad, if you're watching those videos that promise you a paradise for pennies on the dollar, understanding the difference between those two things is the only thing that matters. I learned that the hard way. I ran the numbers, I built the spreadsheet, I did everything a practical man is supposed to do, and I still almost made a catastrophic mistake that would have torched my entire life savings. The difference between a cheap retirement and a valuable one is a lesson I had to learn by flying halfway around the world, twice. To understand how I ended up here, in a functional, beautiful European city instead of broke and frustrated on a tropical beach, we have to go back to the beginning. Not to the airport, but to a cold basement floor in Fort Wayne, Indiana. That basement floor was cold. Not just cold, the kind of deep, damp chill that seeps right through your clothes and into your bones. I was 62 years old, lying on my back on the concrete, staring up at the guts of a furnace I knew better than my own handwriting. For 30 years I ran an HVAC business in Fort Wayne. I started with a used van and a set of tools, and I built it into a company with a dozen employees. I understood systems. I knew how to diagnose a problem, source the right parts, and build something that would last. My whole life was about making things work, reliably. Then, 3 years ago, my wife Sarah was gone. Just gone. A sudden illness that nobody saw coming. The house we'd built a life in for 35 years went silent. The kids were grown and gone. The business was sold, leaving me with a nest egg of about $650,000. It sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but it's not infinite. It was the sum total of my entire working life, and it had to last me for the rest of it. Every dollar had to pull its own weight. That night on the basement floor, surrounded by the familiar smell of dust and motor oil, it hit me. I wasn't just fixing a furnace anymore. I was patching up a life I didn't fully recognize. The Indiana winters felt colder, the silence in the house felt heavier. I was a man who knew how to build things, and here I was, just maintaining. Later that night, after I got the heat running again, I fell down a YouTube rabbit hole. The algorithm knows when you're lonely. It fed me a video of a guy my age grinning on a beach in the Philippines, a cold beer in his hand, talking about living like a king for a fraction of what it costs back home. The contrast between his sunny beach and my cold basement was a physical jolt. An idea took root. A dangerous, romantic, completely impractical idea. But I'm not an impractical man. The biggest fear I had wasn't about moving to a new country. It was about being made a fool of. I spent my life looking under the hood, checking the wiring, making sure the foundation was solid. I couldn't just throw that away on a fantasy. So I did what I know how to do. I opened up a spreadsheet. I called it my retirement matrix. The columns were simple but non-negotiable. First, a sustainable cost of living under $2,500 a month, all in. Second, healthcare, not just available, but excellent, affordable, and easy to access. A system has to work when it's under stress, not just on a sunny day. Third, personal safety. I had no interest in trading one set of worries for another. And fourth, the tricky one, a real path to a social life. I didn't want to be a perpetual tourist, a walking ATM for the locals. I wanted to build real connections, to be part of a community. My research kept pointing to two places. The Philippines was the star of the show, the tropical dream. Exactly what that YouTube video promised. But then I found an outlier that kept appearing on quality of life lists, not just low-cost lists. Prague. The numbers seemed to fit, but it was a completely different machine. One was a beach buggy. The other was a European sedan. I decided I wasn't going to guess. I was going to do what any good contractor would do: go on site and run a proper diagnostic. A 3-month test drive of each, one in Asia, one in Europe. Kick the tires, check the plumbing, and see which one was actually built to last. My first stop was the Philippines. Dumaguete, to be exact. The plane door opens, and this wave of warm, sweet air hits you. I found a modern, clean, air-conditioned apartment for $400 a month. $400. I did the math 3 times because it felt wrong. That's less than the property tax on my house in Fort Wayne. The people were incredibly friendly, always smiling. The scenery was straight off a postcard. For the first 2 weeks, I thought I'd cracked the code. I was sending pictures back to my kids thinking, "Your old man is a genius. He's living in paradise for pennies." I was sitting on my balcony, drinking a beer that cost less than $1 and feeling like the smartest guy in the world. But a system isn't tested when the weather is perfect. It's tested when things go wrong. And things always, eventually, go wrong. The first sign was the heat, not tropical warmth, a heavy, suffocating blanket 24 hours a day. That beautiful, cheap apartment? I had to run the AC all day and night just to be able to think straight. My first electricity bill was over $100. Not a disaster, but it was a crack in the perfect facade. Then the internet started going out for hours at a time right in the middle of a video call with my daughter. The whole system felt fragile, like it was held together with tape and good intentions. As a guy who spent his life replacing shoddy ductwork, I started to feel that old familiar itch. The feeling that behind the new paint the wiring was a mess. Then I got a taste of what a real problem looks like. A minor bout of food poisoning hit me hard. For 48 hours, I was weak, dehydrated, and scared. I was alone, thousands of miles from home, and I felt a vulnerability I hadn't felt since Sarah first got sick. I dragged myself to a local clinic. The staff were kind, but the facility was basic. Clean, but not a place that inspired confidence for anything more serious than a stomach bug. I asked another expat, an older Australian guy, what he'd do if he had a heart attack. He just shrugged and said, "Hope the airport is open. You fly to Manila, and you pay." That was the moment the dream shattered. The healthcare system, my second most important column, wasn't a system at all. It was a gamble. Fine on a sunny day, but in a storm, you were on your own. The whole setup felt like a house built without a foundation. You can live in it, sure, but you're always quietly terrified of a strong wind. And the social scene? It was exactly what I'd feared. Most of the expats I met, their whole life revolved around a handful of bars. The conversations were always the same: how cheap things were, complaints about the locals, stories about their lives back home. I started to feel that transactional undercurrent. The smiles from some of the locals started to feel a little too wide, a little too expectant. I wasn't a neighbor, I was a walking ATM. By the end of my 3 months, I was exhausted. The constant low-grade stress, worrying about the power, the water, the internet, my health, had worn me down. The Philippines was cheap, but it wasn't a bargain. The price was my peace of mind. I flew to Prague in a state of deep skepticism. My first impression was expensive. I found a nice 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood called Vinogradie. It was beautiful. Quiet streets, tall trees, stunning old buildings with parks every few blocks. But the rent was a gut punch. 25,000 Czech koruna. My calculator told me that was about $1,100 a month. Nearly 3 times what I paid in Dumaguete. My entire budget was flashing red. I had a moment standing in that empty apartment where I thought, "You're a fool, David. You're a practical man chasing a fantasy, and you just got played." But then, I started living. I didn't rent a car. I didn't need one. I bought a year-long public transport pass for about $160 for the entire year. The trams were silent. They arrived every 4 minutes, and they were clean enough to eat off the floor. The metro was a quiet hum of efficiency underneath the city. This wasn't just a bus service. It was a perfectly engineered circulatory system. The money I was saving on a car, on gas, on insurance, on repairs, it completely offset the higher rent. My neighborhood wasn't just a place to live. It was a complete ecosystem. Within a 10-minute walk, I had 5 grocery stores, a farmer's market twice a week in the main square where I could buy vegetables straight from the man who grew them. The rent wasn't just for 4 walls and a roof, it was a subscription fee for a world-class operating system. The power was always on. The internet was faster than what I had in Indiana. The city was safe. I could walk home at 2 a.m. and feel completely at ease. The stress that had been my constant companion in the Philippines just evaporated. But the real test, the big one, was healthcare. I decided to run a diagnostic. I booked a dental cleaning and a checkup, expecting the worst. I walked into the clinic and thought I was in the wrong place. It was more modern than my doctor's office in Fort Wayne. The receptionist spoke English. The dentist, a young woman named Dr. Novakova, spoke perfect English, explained everything she was doing, and showed me the x-rays on a giant screen using equipment that looked like it was from a science fiction movie. The most thorough professional dental exam of my life. I was tense the whole time, waiting for the bill. I was bracing for a $300-400 hit. She handed me the invoice. 1,500 Czech koruna. I had to pull out my phone to do the conversion. $65, that was it. The foundation wasn't just solid, it was bedrock. That's when I finally understood. I wasn't buying cheap items. I was buying a high-functioning society. Infrastructure, safety, a system built to last. The last piece of the puzzle was the people. I was determined not to end up in another expat bar bubble. I saw a flyer in a park for a hiking club. I showed up one Saturday morning, the only American in a group of 20 Czechs and a couple of Brits. Nobody asked me what I did for a living or how much my apartment cost. They asked what trails I'd hiked. We spent the day in the forests outside Prague, sharing snacks and talking about gear. The friendships came slower than in the Philippines. Czech people are more reserved. They don't give you a big smile right away, but when they do, it's real. It's earned. After a few hikes, I was just David, the guy who brings the good American trail mix. I was building connections based on a shared interest, not on the balance of my bank account. So I went back to Fort Wayne, packed up my life into 2 suitcases and a couple of boxes, and officially became a resident of the Czech Republic. The test drive was over. This was the real thing. For my actual home, I wanted somewhere with a little more grit, less manicured park, more real working neighborhood. I found it in Žižkov, famous for its slightly rebellious character and for having more pubs per capita than anywhere else in the world. It felt right. My apartment there, a fully renovated 1-bedroom in an older building, cost me 18,000 Czech koruna a month, about $780. Let that sink in. Living in the capital city of a European country, in a great safe neighborhood, for a price that would barely get you a parking spot in some American cities. I fell into a routine. Fresh bread from a local bakery in the morning, the smell of it spilling out onto the cobblestone street. For lunch, the magic of the Czech lunch menu, the denny menu, soup and a main course, a real hearty meal for about 180 koruna. $8. That wasn't a special, that was just Tuesday. I took the train to Brno for a weekend, sat in the main square, had a fantastic meal and a large cold beer, and the bill came to less than what I used to pay for a watered-down domestic light at a ball game back home. The biggest confirmation came from something I'd been dreading, a full physical. I found a private clinic that catered to foreigners. The facility was spotless. The doctor spent a full hour with me, more thorough than any physician I'd had in 20 years. At the end, I went to the front desk, took a deep breath, and handed over my card. The bill for the consultation was 1,200 koruna, about $52. Not a typo. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, the feeling of knowing the foundation is solid. The whole system, transport, housing, healthcare, was all built to a standard I understood. Quality engineering. And the people grew on me. The stern woman who runs the little grocery store on my corner, the Petravany, started giving me a little nod after about a month. One day she pointed to a type of cheese I hadn't tried and just said, "Is good." It was. That small earned moment of connection felt more valuable than 100 easy smiles. My hiking club friends started inviting me for a beer after our treks. We'd sit in a pub talking about trails and politics and life, and I wasn't David the American. I was just a guy in the group. The constant low-level anxiety I'd carried for years, about money, about my health, about the future, it just wasn't there. But here's the thing about a honeymoon. It ends. The euphoria of those first months isn't sustainable. Sooner or later you have to stop being a tourist and start being a resident. And that's when you find out if the machine is really as well built as you thought. For me, that test had a name. The Ministry of the Interior, Department for Asylum and Migration Policy. My 90-day visa-free stay was running out. Time to apply for the long-term residence permit. My central fear, that deep, cold knot of fear about being played for a fool, came roaring back. Was this the catch? Was this where the beautiful facade peels away and you find rotten plumbing underneath? I did my research. The process involved a mountain of paperwork, a lease agreement, proof of funds, a clean criminal record from the U.S. with a special apostille seal, Czech health insurance. Every American document had to be officially translated into Czech by a court-certified translator. I could picture myself, a 62-year-old from Indiana, standing in the wrong line for 3 hours only to be told I had the wrong form, in a language I couldn't understand. So I made a contractor's decision. When you're facing a complex wiring job you've never seen before, you don't just start pulling wires. You bring in a specialist. I found a relocation agency run by an American woman who had been here for 15 years. I interviewed her like I was vetting a new hire for a 6-figure commercial job. She was calm, professional, and knew the system inside and out. She laid out the whole process on a timeline, every document, every appointment, every potential pitfall. The cost was 30,000 koruna, about $2,300. It felt like a lot, but then I compared it to the cost of failure. I wasn't just buying her time, I was buying insurance against my own ignorance. I wrote the check. It was the most practical decision I could have made. Even with her help, it was a test of nerve. The waiting is what gets you. You submit the pile of paper, your entire life translated and notarized, and then silence. For weeks. You're in a holding pattern, legally in the country, but unable to really leave. Every day that little voice whispers, "They found something." The system is designed to keep you out. It felt exactly like waiting for a building inspector to show up. You're sure your work is good, but you know this one person has the power to derail your entire project over some obscure line in the codebook. Then one Tuesday morning, an email arrived. Your residence permit has been approved. Please make an appointment to provide biometric data. No fanfare, no congratulations, just a simple, functional message. The system worked. Slow, impersonal, and complicated, but not chaos. Not a scam, just a bureaucracy. A predictable, logical, if somewhat clunky machine. When I picked up the little plastic card with my face on it, I didn't feel euphoria. I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. The feeling a mechanic gets when a complex engine finally turns over, smooth and steady. With residency secured, I thought the next hurdle, opening a Czech bank account, would be simple. I'm a resident now, I told myself. I can handle this. My pride got the better of me. I walked into the nearest branch of a big Czech bank, full of confidence. When it was my turn, I smiled at the teller and said in my best, carefully practiced Czech, "Dobrý den, chtěl bych si otevřít účet." Good day, I would like to open an account. She looked at me, expressionless, and unleashed a torrent of rapid-fire Czech. I caught maybe one word in 10. I just stood there, my confidence draining onto the marble floor. She sighed, pointed to a brochure, and went back to her computer. I was that guy, the clueless American who assumes the whole world speaks English. I walked out of that bank feeling smaller than I had in years. Was this my future? Constantly hitting these invisible walls of language and culture? That night I told Petter from the hiking club what had happened. He didn't laugh. He just nodded. "Ah, yes. That bank is for Czech grandmothers," he said. "You went to the wrong machine. You need the one for us." The next day he took me to a different bank with a special expat center. A young woman came out, spoke to me in perfect English, sat me down with a coffee, and in 30 minutes had explained all the account options, set me up with a debit card, and installed the banking app on my phone. The account fee? 0. I learned a critical lesson. This country, like most places, is built for its primary users, Czech people. It's not designed to cater to foreigners. But if you do a little research, if you ask for help, there are always access points. There are doors built for you, but you have to find them. You can't be arrogant enough to think the whole system should reorient itself around you. You have to be humble enough to ask for directions. The final hurdle wasn't bureaucratic, it was human. The hiking club was great. The casual beers after a long trek were good. But I started to notice something. Those friendships seemed to exist only within the container of the activity. I wasn't getting invited to people's homes. The conversations were friendly, but stayed on the surface. That easy, American-style intimacy where you meet someone and 2 weeks later you're at their backyard barbecue just didn't happen. The Indiana loneliness started to creep back in. A different flavor, but there. I worried I had just traded a big, silent house in Fort Wayne for a smaller, silent apartment in Prague. Maybe the Philippines, with its transactional warmth, was better than this polite, impenetrable wall. At least there, the loneliness felt honest. The breakthrough came when I wasn't looking for it. It was late November, the Christmas markets just starting to appear, the air smelling of mulled wine and roasting chestnuts. Peter mentioned he was taking his family to their chata for the weekend, a Czech cottage, a sacred part of the culture. He said it casually. We go to the chata, make a fire, drink some svazak. Then he paused, looked at me for a second, and asked almost hesitantly, You want to come? It wasn't a big, effusive invitation. It was quiet, almost careful. He was offering me a look behind the curtain. I said yes. That weekend I drove out with his family to a small cottage in the forests of Bohemia. We spent the day chopping wood and hiking the trails around the property. At night we sat around a big wooden table, eating goulash his wife had made, drinking beer. Nobody was trying to entertain me. Nobody was treating me like a guest of honor. They were just living, and they were letting me live alongside them. I was sitting in a chair that was probably older than I was, a little threadbare on the arms but solid. The room smelled of wood smoke and garlic. Outside, the windows were black, the Bohemian forest a deep, silent darkness. Peter's wife put a bowl in front of me. Thick, dark goulash. A piece of bread to the side. She gave a small nod and went back to the kitchen. No one was watching to see if I liked it. No one asked if I needed anything. The television was on, some old Czech movie. Peter and his father-in-law were having a low, rumbling argument about politics. Across the room, Peter's daughter was asleep on the couch, a book fallen to the floor beside her. And it hit me. Not like a lightning bolt. Like a slow, spreading warmth. This wasn't a performance. In the Philippines, every day had been a performance. I was the rich American. They were the friendly locals. Everyone played their part. Pleasant but hollow. In Fort Wayne, I was the lonely widower, the capable man rattling around in an empty house. Another part to play. Here, in this room, there was no part for me. I was just a guy. A guy eating goulash on a cold night. My whole life I trusted systems. I trusted blueprints. I trusted things you could measure. I built a spreadsheet to decide the rest of my life. But sitting there, looking at that sleeping child, at the fire in the stove, at the half-eaten bowl of goulash in my lap, I realized something. There's no column on a spreadsheet for this. You can't quantify the feeling of a quiet Tuesday. You can't put a dollar value on the sound of a family just being. This was the system I hadn't known how to measure. A social system. A human system. More robust, more elegantly engineered than any tram schedule or healthcare plan. My fear, that deep cold knot I'd carried for years, the fear of being played for a fool, just dissolved. The fool wasn't the man who moved across the world. The fool was the man who thought the value of a life could be calculated to 2 decimal places. I picked up the piece of bread. I wiped the last of the goulash from the bowl. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I wasn't fixing anything. I wasn't analyzing. I wasn't afraid. I was just home. And so, here I am. Back in my apartment in Zhizkov. It's quiet tonight. Not the heavy, lonely quiet of my old house in Indiana, but a peaceful, earned quiet. My monthly budget averages out to around $2,200. That covers my rent, all utilities, food, my transport pass, and health insurance. It also covers plenty of travel, weekends in Germany, hiking trips in the mountains, comfortably under my $2,500 ceiling, in a place where the foundational systems just work. I've had a lot of time to think about the difference between the life I almost chose and the one I have. It comes down to a few hard-won lessons. If you're thinking about doing this, staring at your own spreadsheet, this is what I'd tell you, man to man. First, and most important, Understand the difference between price and value. The apartment in the Philippines was $400. Cheap. The apartment I rented here was $1,100. A better value. For that higher price, I got a city that works. Public transport that meant I didn't need a car. Grocery stores I could walk to. A healthcare system where a top-notch dental visit cost $65. The cheap beer costs about the same in a chaotic place as it does in a stable one. But the society you're drinking it in, that's what you're really buying. Don't just look at the rent. Look at the operating cost of the life that comes with it. Second, do not trust the brochure. Do a real test drive. My smartest investment wasn't in a stock or a bond. It was in those 2 plane tickets and the 3 months I spent on the ground in both places. My time in the Philippines felt like a failure. It was frustrating and stressful. But it was the most valuable failure of my life, because it saved me from making that mistake permanent. You have to go there and live it. See what happens when the internet goes out, when you get sick, when you have to deal with a bureaucracy. The brochure is for a sunny day. You need to know how the place holds up in a storm. Third, look for the right door. When I walked into that first check bank, I hit a brick wall and felt like a fool. But I wasn't a fool for trying. I was a fool for assuming the main entrance was the only entrance. There are always access points, expat centers, relocation agents, clubs for people with shared hobbies. You just can't be arrogant enough to think the whole system should reorient itself around you. Be humble enough to ask for directions to the door they built for you. Your retirement is the most important business you'll ever manage. Don't just look at the price tag. Read the full spec sheet. Are you buying a cheap product or a quality machine built to last? For my money, for my life, I chose the quality machine. So before you book a one-way ticket to paradise, do a real test drive. And ask yourself, what are you really buying? Because your dollar doesn't just need to go further. It needs to take you somewhere better.